We begin today the Torah portion of Shemot, and I am studying from selections of Likutei Sichot, the first Sicha, the first talk of Shemot. Just a background. Moses had become the leader of the Jewish people, the story of the burning bush in this week's portion, when he was 80 years old. The Torah says that Moshe, when he appears before Pharaoh, is 80 years old. What happened to the 80 years of his life? We don't hear much. There are only 3 stories that appear in the Torah about him, and all involve his care for a stranger. Very briefly, the first one is when he sees an Egyptian hitting a Jew, and he kills, to defend the Jew, he kills the Egyptian. The second story, a Jew hitting a Jew, and he's defending the Jew that is getting hit. The third one, where a goy is hurting another goy, and he's there to defend them. These are the daughters of Jethro, where the shepherds threw them into the well. There is another story, one more story that does not appear in the Torah, but in the Midrash, and that is what God made, what the story that made Moshe the leader in God's eyes, and that is with the goat, with the kid. A little baby goat runs away, Moshe chases it, and then he finds that the goat was thirsty. And Moshe said, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. You should have texted me that that's where you're going. And now you're probably very tired from all the running. So I'll carry you, and he carries him on his back. And God says, that's the man that deserved to lead the Jewish people. One of the story, and part of the reason, it's not the context of our discussion, but the reason is to show us that to be a leader, to be close to God, it's not about studying Torah, it's not about performing of the mitzvot, but it's about caring for others, being there for somebody else. And that's why these are the only stories you read about Moshe before he became a leader. But there is one story between the 2 cases that the Torah describes what happened, and the Torah adds something Moshe is saying that the Rabbi is going to talk about. And let me explain. Moshe sees an Egyptian man hurting a Jew, hitting him. Moshe looks around, he sees nobody, and he kills them and buries them under the ground, covers them with dirt. The next day he goes out and he sees 2 men fighting, 2 Jewish men fighting, hitting each other. One of them raises his hand against the other, so Moshe says to the wicked, to the man who raises his hand, why are you doing it? Why are you hurting? And the man turned to him and he says, oh, now you're going to kill me like you killed yesterday, the Egyptian? And Moshe says, oh, I realize the event is become known. There was, in other words, Moshe, in the simple text, Moshe was under the impression that nobody saw. Now it turned out that somebody did see. And Moshe says, oh, somebody find out. Now, the rest of the story does not belong to the text here, but it's important to share. They go and share with the king that Moshe killed an officer, an Egyptian officer. And Pharaoh summons them to court and rules that he has to be killed. And a miracle happened that his neck turned out to be strong like a marble, and the sword broke. The sword that they were supposed to chop his head off broke. Jewish law tells us that if, one attempt, not Jewish law, the rule at the time, I believe, was 1 attempt. And after that, there is no second attempt. So he ran away. Now, we're going to go back to the statement that Moshe says, oh, this event is known, right? That's what Moshe says. Rashi brings a medrash that alludes to a whole different story that is totally different, and the Rabbi wants to delve into that idea. Let's look. The Torah first mentions Moshe actions as an adult in the following narrative. It says, when Moshe came of age and went out of to his brethren, he saw an Egyptian man beating one of his Hebrew brethren, and he smote the Egyptian. He went out on the next day. So this was the first story, right? He went out on the next day and saw two Hebrew men quarreling. He said to the wicked one, "Why are you hitting you fellow? Why are you hurting each other?" The wicked one replied, "Do you intend to kill me like you killed the Egyptian from yesterday?" Moshe became frightened and he said, "The matter has indeed become known." This is text in the text of the Torah. Moshe got frightened and he says the event of yesterday has become known. Pharaoh heard and he sought to kill Moshe, and Moshe fled. He tried to kill him. As I said, they were already trying to murder him by splitting his head off his body, and a miracle happened and it did not work. And Moshe fled. He fled to Midian, where he had another opportunity to save the daughters of Jethro.
This is all happening while he's 80 years old.
No, he's 40 years.
At this point.
Some say he was 20. He was married. He lived a life for 40 years in Midian.
Well, I read something about him becoming a prince or something, went someplace and he saved the city and
Kush,
yeah.
yes, for 40 years. So this is
He went south.
before. I don't know South North. I'm not familiar, but he went to Kush, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
This is between 40 and 80. So here, some say he was 20. Some say he was 18. So he's very young. There's a gap of years. The point that I made at the beginning is that we don't know much until he's 80. We know nothing in the Torah except those three stories, and all are about defending those who are getting hurt.
What was he doing in Kush?
He became a king. They appointed him a king.
He saved the city from another tribe.
When it says that Pharaoh heard, so one of the Jewish people spoke to Pharaoh?
That man went and told. Let me give you an insight to it, but we're going to lose the text. It bothers me, but you have no choice. The Egyptian wanted to sleep with Shlomit bat Divri. She was the wife of Datan from the tribe of Reuven. So he was an officer in charge of many Jewish officers. The way it was is, 10 slaves are under one officer, Jewish officer. 10 officers are under one Egyptian officer. So it's like a pyramid. So one Egyptian officer is in charge of 100 slaves. One Jewish officer is in charge of 10 slaves. So what does the man do, the Egyptian? He wakes him up in the middle of the night, this man, Datan, and he says to him, "Go wake up the slaves, I need them to walk now." While he's running around to waken his 10 slaves, the Egyptian goes into the tent and does what he wants to. Shlomit bat Divri didn't even know about it. She thought it's her husband. The Jew, the husband, comes back and he catches them as he's leaving the tent. The Egyptian realized that the husband has figured out what happened, so now he wants him to keep quiet, so he starts hitting him. And that's why Moshe watches what is going on, and he knows the man did in the tent, committed a crime, and outside in the field is hitting him, so he should keep his mouth shut. And Moshe says he deserved to die. And he kills him with God's name. He didn't kill him with his own hands. Why is it important? Because there is another man called Aviram. Datan and Aviram are the troublemakers. So Aviram is the brother of Shlomit bat Divri. He's his brother-in-law. They're brother-in-laws. The next day they were fighting over this incident. Datan don't want to live with his wife anymore because someone else slept with her. Aviram is defending her because he said she didn't know. She really didn't know. And they were quarreling. And that's where Moshe comes and says, "Why are you hurting each other?" So, and these two men now goes and blame Moshe to Pharaoh. Later on, they will join with Korach. They will be big troublemakers. They will be swallowed by the earth together with Korach. This man, the boy that was born, by the way, later on we find out that he cursed God and he was the one who was stoned. He's the one who Moshe ruled that he do not belong to the tribe where he wanted to be, because his father is an Egyptian and the converts are on a separate area. They are not part of the tribes. I just want to give you one more insight that you probably did not hear. Even later on, when Korach is rebelling against Moshe, it says Korach, Vedatan and Aviram, those two brother-in-laws, Ve'on ben Pelet, another man, and 250 leaders of the tribe of Reuven. On ben Pelet, we know, was saved because his wife was very righteous. She saw what was going to happen. She knew it's no good. She saw it was wrong, and she was able to save her husband with her wit. But later on, God says to the man, let you bring an incense to God, and the one who is God chosen will live, and the rest of them will die. Because anyone who brings a strange fire should be put to death. Anybody is familiar with that? We read over there how many pans they bought. The Torah tells us 250. 250. And one is asking, what happened to Datan and Aviram's pans? It says Korach, 250 men, and Datan and Aviram. It's in the Torah. So aside from 250, there are two more. Later on, God says, Moshe says, come, do it. But realize, if God has not chosen you, you will be put to death. All 250 men bought strange pans, strange fire with a pan of spicing, and they died. The fire consumed them while they're swallowing Korach and his family. You know that story. The rabbis asked, what?
That's Torah.
It's in the Torah, I'm telling you. But the question I have is, it should have been more than 250. It should be 251 or 252. And the answer is, the Jewish law tells us that someone who was raped, a woman, a married woman, against her will, she's allowed to be with her husband, except a Kohen. A Kohen is not allowed to live with a wife if she was raped or someone else slept even with her, even if it was acceptable, because it's not her fault. Anybody is familiar with that story, with this law? That's part of Jewish law. Now, they wanted to become Kohanim. They wanted to become priests. Becoming a priest allows you to bring incense, the pan. Datan knew that if he brings a pan, he'll have to divorce his wife. So he wasn't there to become a Kohen. He didn't want to become a Kohen because he didn't want to let go of his wife. All he wanted is to hurt Moshe, to rebel against Moshe. But everybody else wanted to become a high priest, and only high priest brings the incense. They wanted to say, we should be the one. And they took a chance. Korach as well. Datan and Aviram, Datan, because his wife was being abducted by the Egyptian, he knew if he's going to choose to be a Kohen, he will have to let go of his wife. Therefore, he did not. That's why you find only 200 Korach's pan and 250 men, but you don't find Datan and Aviram bringing pans. This is a side story. We didn't even get to this. Let's get to it.
We'll go back one second. I understand this part, you talked about the Torah, but the discussion about Moshe is Midrash?
Which discussion?
All the stuff that you talked about, just about.
It's in the text, we just read it.
No, but that part I understand, but you told in effect the background story. What is the background?
Which is the background?
The background story.
About the goat,
Why-
the kid
why-
is a medrash. Why he killed the Egyptian?
Yeah.
Oh, that background, that's a background. That's a medrash, yes.
Yeah, okay, so it's just in Midrash.
And I encourage you to attend the next JLI, because in the second lesson, I do, because I show you, and there is not a single discussion that I do lead without people touching upon the discussion that will come up in the clarity of what medrash is, and how does medrash fit with the text. Is second lesson, which I just prepared. And it's really, once you understand that, it comes to life. I'm serious, and I'll continue doing it because I do believe that it will save time for people who continuously studying Torah because it will put in order and explain how things work. Let's move on.
It's like for the commercials.
Pharaoh heard and he sought to kill Moshe, and Moshe fled. And the phrase, and Moshe became frightened. It says Moshe became frightened, and he says it's become known. Rashi comments, the verse should be understood according to its plain meaning, that he got frightened because he's going to be punished for what he had committed. He had committed a crime by killing an Egyptian officer. Alternatively, Rashi continues, according to the Medrash, he was worried because he saw wicked informers among the Jewish people. He thought, if this is so, perhaps they are not worthy of being redeemed. So again, the Egyptian he killed yesterday, today, two people are quarreling, and he tells to one of them, wicked person, Rasha, why are you hurting your friend? And the man says, what, you're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? The Torah says, Moshe frightened, and he says, oh, it became known. One simple explanation, Rashi says, is the way a text reads. It became known, meaning now Pharaoh is going to seek to kill me for killing an officer. However, alternatively, Rashi says, Moshe frightened, and he says, now I understand why they are being enslaved and punished by God. Because they are unable to live together. They are unable to care for each other. They like for excuses to fight each other. The question arises, why does the plain meaning that Moshe feared for his life, because it had become public knowledge that he killed the Egyptian, not suffice? Why Rashi needs to add another explanation, which is Medrash? Why must Rashi also cite the interpretation of the Medrash that Moshe's concern was that his brethren would not deserve to be redeemed, which is not at all alluded to in the verse? Harry, you understand the question? Why is Rashi coming up with a Medrash? Rashi is there to explain the simple text. The simple text, he says, oh, it was known, and Pharaoh is going to kill me now. Why Rashi says it's alluding to the fact that they cannot get along, and that's why they deserve to stay in exile. In particular, this interpretation of Moshe's fear warrants explanation. The Rabbi says, in addition, that explanation is not so smooth. It's not so simple. Why? Because it also necessitates interpreting the continuation of the verse. And he said, the matter has indeed become known in a non-literal manner, instead of its plain meaning, that Moshe was concerned about the consequences of his having killed the Egyptian. Another explanation becomes necessary. Therefore, when commenting on the latter phrase, after stating that this phrase should be interpreted plainly, Rashi also cited the Midrashic interpretation that the matter become known to me, regarding which is I wondered, how did Israel sin so severely to warrant their being subjugated with backbreaking labor? The Rabbi says, based on the change now, it's not just that he feared for his life, but he's saying, now I understand the reason why they are not going out of Egypt. So we need to understand, what did he fear? The only way to explain he fear is that they will not leave the exile. They will stay in exile.
But at this point, Moshe didn't know anything of being a leader or taking the Jews out of
No,
Egypt. So,
but he saw his brethren, he knew their brethren. The Torah says he came out to see his brethren, and he sees that they're enslaved. By the way, the Levi tribe was never enslaved. You know that, right? He was a Levi. But he knew it's part of his family. It's part of his group.
Not only was he Levi, he was a prince of Egypt.
In addition to that, right. But he knew full well his father and mother and brother and sister. He knew them. But he was privileged to live in the palace. But he goes out to see his brothers and to defend them, right? That's what the Torah. I'm not going to tell you what the Medrash says, what he did. But the Torah text. So he knew that they are enslaved. And he's asking himself, why? Now he feared that they will never leave exile, simply because of their behavior. And that's what he says. Yes,
Is there any connection when they're quarreling and
I did not hear.
and he was gone for 40 years from his brethren, and when they rebelled against God, and for 40 years they were in the desert. Is there any connection there? 40 years there, 40 years here.
There must be a connection, but it's out of the context. Who?
So the Levites weren't enslaved because they were related to Moshe and he was a prince?
No, because they knew full well at the outset that the direction is towards slavery. So they did not volunteer to work for pay. Instead, they were the leaders. They studied the Torah and they encouraged the rest of the Jewish people to follow Jewish tradition. I spoke last week about it at length on Shabbat, that the 10th of Tevet is a day of fasting, and it's nothing happened. Realistically speaking, no crime was committed except the siege over Jerusalem began. It took 3 years for the Babylons to destroy the wall and enter the city. But the siege itself is the beginning of all trouble, and therefore it's much harsher fasted than all other fast days. If it falls on Shabbat, we fasted. The 9th of Av, if it falls on Shabbat, we push it off. Many times we push it off. The Ta'anit of Esther, before Purim, if it falls on Shabbat, we do it on Thursday, and it happens many times. The 10th of Tevet, if it happens on Friday, which happened last year, we fast on Friday, even though we come hungry to Shabbat. Even if it would fall on Shabbat, we fast on Shabbat, because it's the most difficult, it's the most painful experience, one of the reasons. But again, I don't want to get out of context. It is possible to offer a plain resolution of the above question. Rashi was seeking to address a general difficulty raised by the verse, and Moshe became frightened, and he said, the matter has indeed become known. Why does the Torah mention this point? After all, Moshe's fear did not lead to any immediate action, for he did not flee to Midian until after Pharaoh heard about the matter and sought to kill him. Says the Rabbi, Rashi wants to address a question, and the question is, why does the Torah record what Moshe said? Moshe frightened, and he said the matter had become known. Who cares? There was no change of any behavior or anything. Moshe did not flee immediately upon discovering that the matter is known. He waited until Pharaoh caught him and judged him and wanted to kill him. Only then he left. So why does the Torah say that Moshe feared? And he says the matter has become known. There is no reason. But if you explain the Medrash, if we follow the Medrash, that he feared that the Jewish people will never leave exile because they don't care about each other, that's important to share. One might want to raise a similar question. Why was it necessary for the Torah to relate the entire narrative? The Rabbi is going to address another question we're going to skip. We continue at page 5, the third paragraph. Nevertheless, we are not given an explanation as to why the Torah tells us that Moshe became frightened. To resolve this question, Rashi cites the interpretation of the Medrash, which explains that Moshe's fear was not motivated by concerns for his own future, because we see that he didn't do anything, he didn't run away, but rather resulted from his worry that perhaps the Jewish people were not worthy of redemption. Says the Rabbi, did you understand so far? In other words, Rashi.
How did Moshe know about the whole concept of redemption and leaving?
So I already addressed that. I think a similar question was raised. Moshe knew that he was Jewish,
Right.
and he was wondering why the Jewish people suffer,
Okay.
based on the Medrash explanation. And when he saw that the two men quarrel, and when he's trying to stop them, they tell him, bug off, and it's none of your business,
Right.
he frightened. He says, now I understand why God is punishing them. That's the text.
Had in his mind the concept that the Jews were going to exile.
No, he didn't know that. He had no,
It
it doesn't matter. He just, we don't know if he knew it or not. Maybe he knew it, maybe not, doesn't matter.
But that's all I'm wondering.
He may, I will say that he didn't know. If you prove me wrong, I will accept that, but it doesn't change. Moshe simply says to himself, the Jewish people are suffering heavily. I do not understand why, and I hope it will come to an end. When he saw those men behaving that way, he says, I hope I'm frightened because it doesn't look like it's going to end if that's the way they behave. That's all.
But wasn't he right? He was right,
That's why the Torah records it.
because he was right, because the people that exiled Egypt were not redeemed. It was the next generation that was redeemed.
No, they were redeemed. The next generation is the one who entered the Holy Land.
Right.
But they were redeemed, and they were redeemed earlier. They were enslaved less than what they were supposed to. But that's not the discussion here. Was he right? It's hard to say that, but that's why the Torah records it. According to this Medrash, and Rashi is bringing it as part of a simple text. In other words, that's the only way to explain why Moshe was frightened, why Moshe feared. Okay, and now the Rebbe is going to go to the simple text. Now that we explain the Medrash, the Rebbe is going to address another question. We don't have much time, unfortunately. I'm going to share with you what the Rebbe wants to address because it will be easier to comprehend. The Rebbe is going to address how come Moshe feared. Simple text is he feared that the Pharaoh will discover that he killed an Egyptian. As it happened, later on, Pharaoh wants to kill him. Why did he fear? A trustworthy, a man who trusts God should not fear. Fear, gam ki elech begeitz al mavet. Even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. There is no fear. Moshe expressing fear deserve a discussion. And the Rebbe is going to bring one more, the Medrash. The Medrash tells us there were two men who had feared and they had no reason to fear. One is Jacob, on the way back from Laban to meet his brother, it says, Vayira Yaakov, Yaakov feared, even though God had promised him, no worries, you'll come back home to your father, yet he feared. And the second one is Moshe. In this exposition, he feared for his life. He shouldn't have, because he should have realized that his entire life is on miracles. The way he was discovered in the Nile is unusual. The king wants to kill all the boys and he was saved. The fact that he was raised in the palace as a prince is unusual. So he should have not expressed fear. And the Rebbe is going to go into details. We're not going to have the time about two ways of looking where a righteous man is promised by God, no worries, and they still express fear. One way of looking at it is a very positive way. One way is not so positive. Yes.
But Avraham had more faith in Hashem than Yaakov or Moshe, didn't he? Yeah, I mean, Avraham trusted Hashem more than any of those other guys.
They all trusted Hashem.
But Avraham even more so.
Why do you
Because
say that?
Avraham didn't have the fear that the other two had.
All right, so we have to discover what the fear, what's the source of the fear and what this reflects. You see, in a simple way, you say, because he had no trust. I don't agree with that. As a matter, and the Medrash don't agree with you, as we'll see. Now, we're going to start reading, now that you understand the point. We're going to go back to the simple text. Yeah, Moshe feared and says the matter had become known, meaning Pharaoh is going to catch me and hang me, which actually that's what happened. How come Moshe feared?
He also didn't worry about it. Didn't worry about it having been found out until Pharaoh came after him.
Immediately after, a week later. What's the problem? Moshe did not run away, which requires an explanation. But the fact is that the simple text, as Rashi says, kipshuto, as the text reads, he feared that Pharaoh is going to go after him.
So first, not lead to any immediate action.
He did not do anything about it except fear. He didn't do anything. He didn't run away.
which is strange.
It's very strange. But that's it. It's a simple text question, not on the Rebbe. You understand that? Yeah, Harry is raising a point. If he feared, how come he didn't do anything about it? And my answer would be, many times people fear and they are caught like a deer in front of the headlights. During the Holocaust, people saw the address, it's all written all over the wall. And yet they didn't do anything. They chose not to do. The default is to continue on with life. Even at the time when Kristallnacht took place, a lot of other events, they didn't. They decided to ignore the writing on the wall. That's a simple explanation. But again, this is a discussion of the text itself, not the Rabbi. Our sages taught a verse never departs from its plain meaning. This principle should certainly apply in the present instance, where Rashi not only gives an alternative, straightforward, kipshuto explanation of Moshe's fear, but presents it before the Midrashic interpretation. Before he brings the Midrash, he says kipshuto in a simple text, and then Rashi says, and this is the Midrash. Therefore, we must assume that even according to the plain meaning of the phrase, and Moshe became frightened, that he feared for his life, because it had become known that he killed an Egyptian. There is an explanation, at least according to the approach of the Rush, as to the way the Torah mentions his fear. However, to understand the above, let us first cite a comments of the Midrash on the verse, and Yaakov became very frightened and he was distressed. I told you it's about Yaakov about to meet Esav. He's frightened and he was distressed. Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rabbi Reuven, two people received promises from the Holy One, blessed be he, the foremost of the patriarchs and the foremost of the prophets. And nonetheless, they become frightened. Is the foremost of the patriarchs. Yaakov is known as the choicest, the foremost of all the patriarchs, and Moshe is known as the choicest of all the prophets, the foremost of the prophets. Both received direct promise from God, do not fear, and yet they feared. The foremost of the patriarchs, this is Yaakov, the Holy One, blessed be he, told them, behold, I will be with you, and yet ultimately Yaakov became very frightened. Right, I shared that with you. Before he crossed the river to go to Padan Aram, to Laban, God promised him he will be with him and protect him and bring him back to his father, yet he became frightened. The foremost of the prophets, this is Moshe, the only one, blessed be he, told them, behold, I'll be with you, and yet ultimately Moshe became frightened. This is intimated by the verse, and God told Moshe, do not fear him, Og, and it is relevant to offer the reassurance, do not fear him, only to one who fears. The Midrash says, let me explain. So the question, later on, Moshe, before he enters the Holy Land, there was a giant he needs to kill. His name is Og. He's a huge, huge man. God says to Moshe, it's in the text, by the way, do not fear him because I put him in your hands. And Moshe actually jumped. He used 10 amma, he jumped on his cane, and from his cane he jumped high, and he only reached the sole of the foot of Og. This was a huge man, but he was able to kill him because God took a mountain. He raised a mountain to to bury all the Jewish people, and God sent ants, and they drill a hole in the top of the mountain, and it fell into his head, and he couldn't take it out, and he got stuck, and Moshe went and killed him. But we see God says to him, do not fear him, for I've put him in your hands, says the Midrash. Moshe was told by God numerous times, do not fear, and yet Moshe feared. So in this week's portion, God did not say it to him, but we see that a frightened person needs to be assured not to fear. So it's a nature of Moshe to fear. And it starts in this week's portion where Moshe feared. Now, according to the Midrash, it's not fear of something, it's fear that the Jewish people will not be redeemed because of their behavior. Now he feared. But according to simple text, he feared physically, frightened, because he's afraid what Pharaoh is going to do to him. Yes, Harry?
I would think.
By the way, this is Midrash. You understand? This is not the Rebbe.
And
The Rebbe is going to delve into the idea of trust. Yes.
if something is sold by God, don't worry about it. You must also, the tzaddik must also think to himself, between now and when it happens, maybe I will sin, maybe I will do something wrong, so maybe that's the reason why he's still fearing.
That's the explanation given. But it's not so simple. Because after all, God is able to do whatever he wants. And if he promised you not to fear, don't fear.
So, you see,
In other words, God did not only told them, you will go back home, or you will conquer, you will kill the man. God says, do not fear. Al tira oto, do not fear him. Yet we see that he feared him. Your explanation is a good explanation. The commentaries on the Midrash differ regarding the intent of this passage. Some maintain that the Midrash is praising Yaakov and Moshe, just like Harrison, although they received promises from God not to fear, they did not rely on the promise, fearing that perhaps they had sinned in between the promise of God until their actual situation. Maybe they sinned and God went away and changed his mind, and were thus no longer worthy of having God's promise fulfilled. Right, Harry? That's what you're saying.
yeah, I didn't read it in advance.
I believe you. So righteous men, some commentator says this is a great, great attribute to those righteous men. In other words, you're so humble. God says, don't worry. I'll take you to the house of your uncle. You'll come back safely. But later on, 20 years later, he feared. Why do you fear? Why are you fighting? Because God, even though God promised me, who says if I'm deserving of God's blessing? Maybe God took away the blessing because I'm not behaving, I'm not worthy. In other words, he's very humble. The same is Moshe. Moshe fears because he's very humble before God, and he feels, even though God says, do not fear, maybe things have changed because of my behavior. So it's an attribute. It's a greatness of the righteous man. However, other commentaries explain that the intent of the Midrash, the reason the Midrash brings two men, the choices of patriarchs and the choices of prophets, who were promised by God not to fear and feared, the reason the Midrash bring it is that one should not learn from their example. For one ought not to be afraid. Rather, one's heart should be settled, trusting in God. This intent is apparent from the plain meaning of the continuation of the Midrash. The prophet Yeshayahu admonishes the Jewish people, telling them, you have forgotten God who made you, and you are continually frightened throughout the day. That is, the prophet rebukes them for being afraid. So we have two ways of looking at the Midrash. One way is that it's a great attribute to Yaakov and Moshe, that they feared because they are very humble. The second one is actually something we should take from and learn not to do and not to be frightened. How do we see? They show it from Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu rebukes the Jewish people and it says, you're always fighting. Why are you fighting? You're children of God. You shouldn't be fighting. The view of the commentaries that one ought not to be afraid is worthy of exploration. What is wrong with fearing that one is unworthy of the fulfillment of God's promise because his service is imperfect and he has sinned? And on the contrary, says Rabbi, at first glance, this would appear to be a very positive quality. One's humility is so great. One's humility is so great that he is always concerned that his divine service is not flawless and that he has sinned. This question thus draws focus on the nature of the attribute of bitachon. Bitachon is trust in God, which we are commanded to pursue. Bitachon, trust in God, is not merely the faith that God has the potential to bestow good upon a person and save him from adversity, and the like. Rather, it means that the person trusts that God will actually do this. In other words, God promised. You have to have a trust that God will actually do it and nothing to worry. And his trust is so absolute that he is completely serene and does not worry at all. As Chovat HaLevavot states, the essence of bitachon, the essence, the core, the DNA of trust is the serenity felt by the person who trusts. His heart relies on the one in whom he has placed his trust, that he will do what is best and most appropriate for him in the matter at hand. Says the Rabbi, how do you know? The Rabbi is going to go on and we're not going to go there. So again, let's summarize what we studied. Moshe feared and says the matter has become known. Medrash, the second interpretation is, he says, now I understand why they are in exile and not getting redeemed, because they don't care. That explains why the text appears in the Torah. However, the simple explanation is Moshe feared. He feared for his life because he says, now Pharaoh is going to find out and going to punish me. That, says the Rabbi, can be viewed as a great attribute of Moshe, that he always feared. He didn't trust in God because he felt maybe God promised him, but yet he's not worthy. And Yaakov Medrash says Yaakov and Moshe had both shared the same behavior. According to many commentators, the Medrash is bringing Yaakov and Moshe's situation that they feared to teach us that this is not the way to behave, but rather to trust God. And trusting God, if you read in Chovat HaLevavot, the book that there is an entire book that talks about as a gate of trust. The idea of trust is that knowing that what God promises, He will actually deliver. And that's where you show trust in God. And you're supposed to trust if God says, do not fear. And the Rabbi is going to go on to explain those two opinions, whether it's a great attribute or it's something that we should not do. And it also depends on the person. If you're a very, very righteous man and you know that everything is from God, you still feel that maybe you're undeserving. That's humility, but it doesn't exist. It does not apply to most of us. We'll continue here. We'll conclude here and continue next week.
And
Thank you.
Abraham was on the same level because he feared for his life with Sarah those times too. So
Where does he
right
fear?
before I made the comment that Abraham
Where did the Abraham fear?
that for his life when he told people that Sarah was his sister a couple of times. So they were all on the same level. I withdraw my previous statement.
You're making a good point. Abraham feared that they will abduct Sarah and kill him. So he said to Sarah, say that you're my sister. And so it's a very good point you're making. Are you asking a question?
No, I'm just making a statement. I withdraw what I said before. I said that Abraham was on a higher level because he trusted Hashem implicit with better
Completely.
faith. But it was the same because he also had
All
fear
right.
too.
So actually, Manatee said that Abraham leaving Israel to Egypt is a sin because he did not have trust in God. God says to him, go to the land that I sent you, and I will bless you, and you'll become multiplied, and you'll be very wealthy. A hunger is breaking. It's one of the 10 tests, and Abraham is going down to Egypt. That in itself is a question of trust. Most commentators explain there is a reason for it. I'm not going to go into, but Manatee says he lost faith in God. He had no trust in God. Now, just a minute. Now you bring in another point, and that is that he's asking his wife to say is she his sister because he feared for his own life. I don't know what to say, but it doesn't say that he feared. It does say he feared. Yeah, it does say that he feared. With Isaac? What?
Well, he told his wife is also his sister.
Oh, Isaac did it. Yes, correct.
But I want to add to what he said.
Yes, Harry.
The reason why Abraham should be considered above all the others is because Abraham was one who started monotheism. He's one who discovered God as the omnipotent. So he is to be looked at as above all the other others.
Okay, the Torah and the Medrash is filled with the idea that Yaakov is the choicest, is the highest of all of our patriarchs.
Why?
But Yaakov came along after Abraham and Yitzchak.
I understand, it doesn't
I
change.
know, Yaakov was.
Why?
The Torah says this?
Yeah,
Okay. I don't
many
question it.
places. But but you have raised a very good point, and that is that Yaakov is not the only one who feared God, who feared from an event, even though God promised him. Coming to Israel and living for the hunger. And as I said, Nachmanides actually calls that, and I'm saying that he did not, literally, Nachmanides said he should have trusted God. The same the Torah tells us that he's fearing for his life. That's why he's asking Sarah to say she's his sister. Perhaps there should be an explanation. I just don't know.
He's human.
Is human? Okay. I love it. Please, yeah, I need you in every class here.
What that's what cost him not being able to go into Israel.
The hitting of the rock you're talking about, Moshe did trust God. The rocks got mixed up. And actually, it's more complex and very difficult. Me personally, I don't understand that. God spoke to him and says, talk to the rock. And suddenly he spoke to the wrong rock. And it didn't work. So he hit the rock. But it wasn't something that about trust. It's about obeying God. God said, speak. He should have continued speaking. He shouldn't use his cane. But there is no trust issue there.
This is commotion of the people that were laughing at him, right? And emotions. And he hit it.
Moshe as a leader was not perturbed by commotion and animals and people.
No, it's interesting.